Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Turansky with the National Center for Biblical Parenting. And I want to talk to you today about working with children in a way that transfers responsibility to them. So on our blog at Thriving Kids Connection, we have a number of tools and ideas that help parents to know how to work with their children using a heart-based approach. When I mean a heart-based approach, it means we're looking for tendencies that children have. We're looking for wrestling that's going on in their hearts. Often they're losing the battle when it comes to desires and emotions, and so children need very specific tools and plans in order to move them along in the process. Now, what we've done is we've gone to the scriptures and we've identified 7 tools that God uses to bring about change in our lives. Those 7 tools are strategic because God changes us and our hearts, and we as parents then can turn around and work with our children in a way that ministers to them or touches their hearts. Change then becomes the goal. We're trying to move them in a direction toward godliness or maturity or responsibility or whatever word you want to use for that. So we're moving our children along in that process. I want to talk to you about one of those tools that we've identified that's so helpful, and it's called transferring responsibility. It's what God does with us, that there are parts of things that He does that we realize are God's responsibility, and other parts that He requires of us. He transfers responsibility to us to take action. We can do the same thing with our children. So what we want to do is we're helping them to take responsibility, for example, in the instruction routine. When we give children an assignment, a task to do, we transfer responsibility to them and we require them to report back. By them having to report back now, they have some obligation. They have to turn around and initiate to do something. Very important part of this process. It moves the instruction routine from just compliance, getting done what I told you to do, to cooperation, which requires initiative on the part of the child. So that's one way that we do transferring responsibility, is through giving instructions. Another way we transfer responsibility is when we have to correct children. When they're off track and we need to help them get back on track, we use a break. That concept of the break is explained in our materials, and you're welcome to go there and learn more about it, or I'll be talking about it in future podcasts or Facebook Live with you. But the idea here is that when a child is off track and they're doing the wrong thing, we transfer responsibility to them by saying, you need to go take a break, settle down, and come back and see me when you're ready. We've transferred responsibility. A lot of challenges sometimes with the break, but that's the idea, that the child has to respond back in that process. Another way that we transfer responsibility has to do with our vocabulary and the things that we say. We talk to a child, we use words that say things like, hey, I want to help you with your wrestling in your heart here. It sounds like you're having a problem. You're upset right now? And so all those words are words that transfer responsibility. Instead of saying you're making me upset, you're ruining the attitude in the house or something, which isn't wrong. But transferring responsibility is one of those tools that our children need. Now, 2 problems happen in young people when they don't take responsibility for themselves. One of those is a victim mentality that says, if all the world would change, I'd be fine. My problems are the result of other people doing things. So the victim mentality that often children experience has to do with their lack of taking responsibility for themselves, and they're part of the problem. So on the one hand, we have the victim mentality that children often engage in, which has to do with anger, and they're being upset and blaming. A lot of blaming goes into that. That's because they're not taking responsibility. So transferring responsibility, knowing how to do that, is important. The second tool, or the second, symptom of not taking responsibility in young people, the first one is blaming and the victim mentality. The second one is entitlement. You owe me something. And so children don't take responsibility. They don't have a grateful heart, but rather they tend to have this sense of entitlement, and that sense of entitlement gets them into trouble both now and ongoing. So the tool of transferring responsibility is a key element for to help children to make changes. If they don't make that change, then they're going to grow up to be unhappy people. So blaming on the one hand and entitlement on the other are signs of this lack of taking responsibility for oneself. the way we handle that is important. It's one of our tools, so we're looking for ways to help kids learn how to transfer or take responsibility for themselves. So we transfer that responsibility. Now, what I'm not saying is that we say, well, you solve it, let me know how it goes, and we walk away. Or we say to a child who's failing at school, well, you just deal with your school problem, and we walk away. That's not transferring responsibility the way we're talking about. When we're transferring responsibility, we're requiring children work a plan and they be held accountable. That's transferring responsibility. Now, there are two kinds of people in the world. There's whiners and there's solvers. This is what my blog post is about that I posted today on Thriving Kids Connection. Is your child a whiner or a solver? Now, whiners focus on the problem, the thing that's wrong. They do a lot of complaining, and they have a problem because they're not taking responsibility for their part. They're whining. On the other hand, we have solvers. We want to move our children from being whiners to solvers in their lives. It may not just be that whiny voice that they use or that tone that's really irritating. That could be part of it. But it might be the way they talk about life. If children talk about life in terms of problems only, then they're complaining. If they come into the kitchen and say, for example, Mom, there's no food in the house, or Mom, I'm hungry. Okay, that's working on a problem. What's the solution? If a child comes into the kitchen, you might say to him, okay, that's complaining. Go back out. Try again. If a child wants a snack, the child can come in and say, Mom, could I have a snack? So that's focusing on the solution. Just the very vocabulary that our children use is important. You might think that's just semantics, but it's much more a reference to the heart and how our children are thinking about life. So think in terms of transferring responsibility to children, and good things can happen. That means we help children develop a plan for their particular issue. If a child is having anger episodes and reacting to challenges in their lives, they need a plan. So helping them develop a specific plan, holding them accountable to their plan, is part of transferring responsibility. The child who's being mean to his brother has a problem. He really lacks kindness. And so helping him develop some solutions along that line can be very helpful. And in so doing, we are transferring responsibility. Think in terms of that, even in the vocabulary, the words you use, because sometimes as parents, we take on the defensive posture when our children start attacking us, and we then become a defensive of their attacks, and we don't transfer that responsibility. We try to argue with kids, or we try to reason with them. And there's nothing wrong with reasoning with children, but sometimes they want to be reasoned with when they're upset and angry and mistreating people. We can't do that. We have to transfer responsibility for them to settle down first before they come back, and we'll help them work on a plan. But helping children develop solutions in life is going to be so important. It's just one of 7 tools that we use in the Biblical Parenting Coaching Program. You can learn more about this and even make some comments, if you would, on my blog post I made today called a Whiner or a Solver, and it will help children to be able to take responsibility. You might have a question you want to ask. You can go ahead and ask it there. I'll try to answer it, and we'll respond to this whole idea. Let's interact together about transferring responsibility to children. How are we going to do that in ways that will help them to grow and become responsible? God does that with us. We have our responsibility to respond to Him, to accept His grace, to deal with sin, to be repentant. He transfers responsibility, and that moves us more and more in the sanctification process toward our Lord. And we can do the same thing as we're working with our children to move them and help them to grow in their maturity and their challenges they're facing. So take this one idea, this idea of transferring responsibility, use it in your parenting. It will bring about significant change certainly as it's mixed with the other tools. There's 7 tools. You can identify all the 7 tools at the bottom of my blog post. I give you an indication of them. In fact, the last several blog posts that we posted are each dealing with one of the different tools to give you some ideas about how to use that tool in your home. I trust that God will use you as the primary trainers of your children in your home because you're the parent. We are supporting you and want to do that in as many ways as we can. So check us out at thrivingkidsconnection.com. Thank you very much.